It was in Vietnam that presidents and generals saw television as an enemy. By this time, a landmark poll had revealed that more Americans were getting their news from television than from newspapers. And the White House soon learned that pictures can be hazardous to foreign policy.
This is what the war in Vietnam is all about. The old and the very young. The Marines have burned this old couple's cottage because fire was coming from here. And now when you walk into the village, you can see...
The war between television and the White House began August 5th, 1965. CBS reporter Morley Safer was invited by a platoon of Marines to film a search and destroy mission.
Shortly after, an officer told me he had orders to go in and level the string of hamlets that surrounds Cam Nhi village.
I got a call from a friend at the embassy who said the shit is hitting the fan on this, just so you know.
Did you set fire to these houses here?
No, we were just off to the left when it was burning.
Were you getting fire from them?
Somewhat, not too much.
For President Johnson, the story was a salvo aimed right at the White House war policy. He tried to pressure the executives of CBS into removing Safer from Vietnam.
The women and the old men who remained will never forget that August afternoon.
I was privy to a meeting in Washington between President Johnson, Frank Stanton, who was then head of CBS, where the president worked over Frank Stanton unmercifully about the caliber and nature of the coverage CBS was giving and how it was inaccurate and destroying morale and so on. And because Morley was Canadian, he really threatened Frank Stanton with exposing Morley as having been politically questionable in the past.
The Secretary of State, Dean Rusk, a close advisor to the president, was convinced that Safer had staged the entire story.
To his death, and he told me this, he believes the following. I was a KGB operative. I paid a platoon of young Marines to go in to mock up a village, got Vietnamese to go in, gave them the lighters, and told them to destroy the village so we could film it. To his dying day, Dean Rusk believed it.
But what was more disturbing for the White House were the pictures of dead and wounded Americans that seemed to be burned onto the television screens.
Awful sick of her. I'll be so glad to go home. I don't know. It's the worst area we've been in since I've been in Vietnam.
You think it's worth it?
Yeah, I don't know. They say we're fighting for something. I don't know.
What you have is a recipe for a presidential disaster. You're unable to fight a war over a long period of time with television. We were unable to counter the squalid, bloody depictions on the screen of young men getting blown away every night of every week. And there is no counter rebuttal to that.
January 31st, 1968, the North Vietnamese launched the most daring assault of the war, the Tet Offensive. The television reports were alarming.
The enemy's well-coordinated attacks occurred throughout South Vietnam, but the most dramatic demonstration of his boldness came at the very symbol of America's presence in Vietnam, the brand new U.S. Embassy building there. CBS News correspondent Robert Shackney reports.
Military police got back into the compound of the $2.5 million embassy complex at dawn. Before that, a platoon of Viet Cong were in control.
Television images of the Tet Offensive did as much destruction to the administration's policies in Vietnam as anything that ever happened.
All told, 5 Americans were killed during the day.
I couldn't believe what I was seeing on television. It stunned me. Was President Johnson shocked? Of course he was.
What was so tormenting to him was that Tet, as a military operation, was a total disaster for the Viet Cong. They lost 40,000 people. You go back after Tet and say, well, now, wait a minute. We won an unbelievably brilliant military victory. People say, oh, come on, get off of it. You guys damn near lost your embassy.
The brutality of the Vietnam War was brought home in one telling broadcast when General Lo An, an ally of the Americans, executed a suspected informant on the streets of Saigon.
I saw that tape, and I saw General Lo An blow the top of the man's head off. And Shad Northshield said to me, where do we stop this? Because you saw a lot of blood spurting out. You saw the man falling on the ground and the blood still coming out of the top of his head. And I said, cut it when the bullet hits the skull. The execution was added to people's feeling that this is just horrible. This is just terrible. Why are we involved in a thing like this? People were just sickened by it. And I think that added to the feeling that the war was the wrong war in the wrong place.
Tonight, Report from Vietnam by Walter Cronkite.
If the communist intention was to take and seize the cities, they came closer here at Hue than...
When America's most trusted anchor, Walter Cronkite, went to Vietnam, the impact would be devastating for President Johnson.
By the time we'd gotten to Tet, I was very concerned that our military was not telling us the full truth of the nature of our involvement and that we were over-committed.
As a matter of fact, the whole measure of the success of this war had been that we were pushing out from the secure cities, pacifying the countryside around them in an increasingly widening ring. Now all that seemed to be knocked into a cocked hat.
And then when the military, General Westmoreland was saying that another 150 or 200,000 troops would do the job, one had to say, well, wait a minute, hold on a minute. Is this a bottomless pit?
To say that we are closer to victory today is to believe, in the face of the evidence, the optimists who have been wrong in the past.
Johnson now was faced with an editorial that had a circulation several times greater than that of the New York Times.
Told him what Cronkite had said, and he made the comment to me that if he had lost Cronkite, he'd probably lost the people.
But it is increasingly clear to this report that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victims, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could. This is Walter Cronkite. Good night.
2 months after Tet, Lyndon Johnson announced he would not seek re-election.
I shall not seek, and I will not accept the nomination of my party for another term as your president.
An unpopular war and a deceptive military in the age of television was a lethal combination.
I think Johnson was coming to a point where he was furious with the military over misleading him. And I think that he was at the breaking point when we did our report. As I say, maybe a very small straw on his back.
Thank you for listening. Good night, and God bless all of you.